You are listening to the Political Periscope, a weekly podcast brought to you by Radio WNET. Interviews on international politics, security, geopolitics, economy, and more. Every Thursday at 7 p.m.
Today's guest of the Political Periscope is Dimitrij Rupel, sociologist, politologist, diplomat, former Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia.
Political Periscope.
Let me start with the obvious question and the obvious thing that's ongoing. You, with your very rich experience in international matters, last day we've seen a horrible shelling of Ukraine by Russia. What should be the world response?
Oh, that's a difficult question. As you know, Slovenia will not have a very prominent role in resolving the problem. We are observing whatever goes on, but certainly the Ukrainian-Russian war does have an effect on Slovenia as well. In Slovenia, there are people who have some reservations regarding the support to Ukraine, and I often wonder why is that. Slovenia has had some problems regarding, clearing up or doing away with the traditions of former communist regime. You understand that because Poland may be in the same situation, may have been in the same situation. I know that Poland has been much more effective, much more energetic regarding doing away with the remains of communism and so on. But still, we have here people who doubt about the rights of Ukrainians to take arms from the West and, antagonizing Russians. They would rather see an end to that war because then the energy issues and oil and gas and food issues, financial, economic situation might improve and so on and so on. So there is a lot of very selfish mood in Slovenia about this war. The government has been very careful not to say something like that. Certainly, Slovenia is a member of NATO and European Union, but one of the parties in the governing coalition, so-called the left, they oppose NATO, they oppose support to Ukraine or sending armaments or whatever weapons to Ukrainians. The situation changed a little after the elections in April. Now we have a very much left-leaning government that has this kind of attitude. Now, what could be done? I don't see any other possibility than to support Ukraine, in whatever way it's possible, since we don't want to, or we should be aware of some historical parallels. In 1938, the West was tolerant and constructive about the plans of Adolf Hitler, and Chamberlain supported occupation of Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia and so on, and then the war started. So we should be very careful not to allow such a situation to develop in Ukraine. Ukraine is a European country, as is Russia, or at least a great part of it, and has the right to choose whatever membership or policy it wants to choose. But certainly the situation is getting quite complicated because of Russian impatience and Putin's rhetoric concerning atomic weapons and so on. So that's no joke. And I think that the threats have been made by him to scare the West, and so that the West would at one particular moment start being more constructive regarding Russia, that they would be afraid of World War III and so on and so on. And you don't need a lot of imagination to see what the consequences of such so-called pacifism or isolationism could be. I know that Poland is extremely energetic regarding the support of Ukraine. It has, according to my knowledge, accepted millions of Ukrainians, taking the Ukrainian kids to Polish schools and so on and so on. So you are doing a lot, and I think that should be appreciated. I'm afraid that Polish effort is not being sufficiently supported in Slovenia, or sufficiently understood in Slovenia. Here, we, especially in our media, mainstream media, often read about rule of law being in danger in Poland and in Hungary, of course, and now in Italy. There is a serious misunderstanding going on. As far as I'm concerned, I see Slovenia as a part of Central Europe and a part of the series of countries going from the Baltic countries to the south, to, if you want, to Romania and Bulgaria, Slovenia certainly, and Croatia. Now, I think that we must be very, very tough regarding the Ukrainian issue. My feeling is that Poland is leading the initiatives or leading the policy of firm policy towards Russia. The more you go to the west, less such firmness exists. I wish that Slovenia would be much more similar to Poland and to other Central European countries. But of course, the government that we have now is a little difficult in this respect. And I must also mention the fact that we shall have presidential elections in a couple of weeks, and that this issue is coming up in debates. And some of the candidates are being very careful not to be too resolute, because that might scare away voters. That's a very complex situation, especially since this is an election time.
Slovenia has its history of also breaking out of the foreign rule in some way. Of course, I mean the independence from Yugoslavia, from Serbian rule. Slovenia had this, I don't want to call it luck, but a chance to suffer only very little in this process comparing to other former Yugoslavian countries. But you've seen, for example, Srebrenica and other genocidal methods used by Belgrade. Do you think that the parallel is somehow justified between what Ukraine is doing now, fighting against Moscow, and Yugoslavian countries fighting against Serbian oppression, Serbian rule?
You know, in a way, there are similarities between the Yugoslav crisis and present Russian-Ukrainian war. Certainly, the Yugoslav crisis has not been as violent as the present war. This is the first real war after World War II. Now, the conflict is quite easy to understand. You know, in Yugoslavia, you had the post-communist groups or parties or republics that wanted to keep Yugoslavia together, to keep unity of Yugoslavia with whatever means, Milosevic and the generals and so on. Now, the idea of keeping the socialist empire, or in Yugoslavia it's difficult to talk about empire, but to keep a socialist formation together, to keep the borders that have been drawn after World War II, this idea is absolutely evident in Russia now. Russia wants to reverse the processes that have happened 30 years ago with the end of the Cold War, and they are doing whatever Yugoslavia was doing 30 years ago. They are doing this 30 years afterwards, 30 years later. Now, I don't want to go too deeply into the similarities, but certainly what has to be understood is that we still have a post-communist mentality in the countries that have not been radical enough. I have talked to your Prime Minister once, Morawiecki. He said that after integration of the two Germanys, only 30% of the judges or the people employed by the courts could continue. They would be letting the 70% of the personnel go. This has not happened in Yugoslavia. This has not happened in Slovenia. It has not quite so much happened in Poland. And that's why Poland is now trying to do amends, to correct the policies that keep the old habits intact and prolong some sort of mentality. I don't know how this is going on, how successful Poland is or can be, but certainly I'm full of admiration for the Polish policy. There was an interview by Morawiecki in the German weekly Der Spiegel, which impressed me very much. I think that we all have to defend democracy, and wherever there is no democracy, introduce it. But it's so difficult. The forces of the past are heavy and very, very dangerous.
So what do you think about those accusations of European Commission towards Poland of lack of democracy in Poland, now in Italy?
Of course, these countries are different. They differ from each other. They have different stories to tell. Italy is a special case. I'm not afraid of fascism in Italy because Italy is, how shall I say, a very chaotic political community country. And certainly once people who have been saying all kinds of things, once they come to the government, they come to their offices, they must adapt to reality. Now, as far as Poland is concerned, it's a different case. Poland is absolutely justified and has all the right to defend its system, its reforms. Also, Morawiecki said that the same system of judicial reform that you have introduced has been introduced in Spain, but nobody was paying attention. Nobody cared about Spain. Only Poland was being targeted. So this is a serious situation which really can destroy or at least affect the fabric of the European Union system. 30 years back, there was total unanimity, and Eastern European, Central European countries wanted to do the same thing as Western democracies were doing. Now, if, let's say, Germans or the French would not support Poland or Czech Republic or Hungary or, the Baltic countries, Slovenia, Croatia, if this happens, there will be a serious problem. And I know that there are some people who prepare themselves for an eventual situation if European Union falls apart, some new associations, some new organizations should be introduced. Germany, I don't know what happens now with this Russian war, but Germany had the intention, if you look at the political programs of Social Democrats, they were really trying to put together or to introduce in Europe some sort of federal system, the European Union as a federation, as a state. Now, for Eastern Europeans or the countries that have only recently accepted or introduced democracy, this is not an easy issue.
Let's touch on the topic of Hungary. There are accusations of lack of democracy. This is one thing. And another thing is actually Hungary right now is breaking this solidarity, unanimity in European Union in regard of war in Ukraine.
I have my serious doubts about our Hungarian friends. On one hand, of course, Orban tries to please his electorate. and nobody wants the electorate to be freezing during winter, and he is trying to make a compromise. So he's in a special situation because he doesn't have his own resources or has few resources. But I think that here one should speak to Hungarians very seriously and try to persuade them that they support the common European action concerning gas from Russia or energy issues which are on the agenda.
And the democracy, do you think the democracy in Hungary is in danger?
Well, I have heard various voices. Some people are very serious about their complaints, but in a way I see Orban doing the same thing that should be done also here. This country has never recovered from communism, from let's say left-leaning radicalism, revolutionary ideas. Red stars and ham and sickle flags are being shown from time to time. It's a very annoying kind of situation. But I guess that with time things will calm down. On the other hand, young generation who have not lived under socialism, who have not experienced any problems with life under communists, they play with words, they play with ideas, they play with policies. The party that I have mentioned, Slovenian Left, they oppose NATO, they want to abandon, to leave the capitalist system, introduce socialist measures, to go back to Yugoslav non-alignment policies and so on. I mean, a lot of ideas that I personally have contradicted and fought practically half of my life, that represented the essence of our liberation movement. All these ideas are coming back, and as if they had not ruined half of this country in the past. The World War II is still glorified as a victory against fascists, and now the left-leaning parties call the opposition, let's say right-wing or center-right parties, they call them fascists. So it's imagination that is coming from, 100 years back, 80 years back.
You've mentioned some initiatives inside of European Union that, in the case of its collapse, could somehow replace it. There is one initiative in European Union in which Poland and Slovenia are involved. I mean, Free Seas Initiative. Is it known in Slovenia? Do you think it can work?
This initiative has been advocated by our president, the outgoing president, Mr. Pahor. Of course, it has been advocated by the former Prime Minister Janša. I don't think it's so popular with the present government. I feel that the idea of this, this centerpiece of Europe is absolutely a fascinating idea. We must remember, or we must think of a situation when Germany, for instance, let's put the war into brackets for the moment. Germany would like to make Europe one country, one federation. And then, if the Three Seas initiative, our countries would oppose that, Germans would say, okay, we can do it on our own. You can leave if you want. They might have an initiative to call another convention, establish or adopt a new constitution, a new kind of constitution that failed back in 2005, as you know, the referenda and so on. I was in the convention at that time, and we were expecting to make a constitution which was very, very, I would say, it was not a unifying system. It was a system that was quite differentiated still. Even, of course, Germans were most prominent in that initiative, but it didn't work in France and in the Netherlands. Anyway, if such an idea, or more radical version of such an idea, federation, European federation, came to the table, to the agenda of the European Union, I'm sure that quite a number of countries would object, and then Germans would say, okay, if you don't want to do it, we shall do it on our own and leave you on the other side. This is the reason why Eastern Europeans trust Americans more than Germans. Sometimes here in Slovenia even, you would hear, we are sitting on the French-German train. It's the French-German locomotive driving European Union. Here, there is a lot of skepticism regarding America, regarding NATO. You are in a much better position that in that respect. But who knows what will happen? I understand why Eastern Europeans are more inclined towards America than to, let's say, to the leading countries of the European Union.
What do you think? When will the war end?
Well, if Putin tries some adventurous move, like tactical nuclear weapon launched against Ukraine, that might scare the West. And here I'm not sure that Western countries would be willing to get engaged in a war, in a nuclear war. That would be World War III. So that would serve perhaps to exert some sort of pressure against Ukrainians. I hear even Americans, Elon Musk, for instance, who say, well, you should allow Russians to take a part of your territory and then we end the war and everybody's happy. I think this is a very dangerous policy, but I hear a lot of this thinking also around here. And certainly, we shouldn't forget what happened at the beginning of World War II. First came Czechoslovakia, then came Poland, and then Russians and Germans made Ribbentrop-Molotov pact, and what happened? So we must be very, very firm, I think. European Union has a chance to be firm because European Union has, 500 million people. It's a huge piece of the world population, plus Americans. That's a gigantic factor. So we'll see what happens. As far as the war is concerned, I think that Ukrainians for the moment will not be bogged down, will not end to fight. I guess that at one moment people will get tired of war. You can continue fighting. Look at World War II, 4 years, 5 years maybe, but then people get tired, you get exhausted, you have nothing to do. So we may be on the threshold of a serious crisis.
This was the Political Periscope. The podcast is released every Thursday at 7 p.m.